The number one question that I get when people find out that my business has a focus on disability employment is, so how do you hire and train people with disabilities? To which I respond, you're making it sound like hiring people without disabilities is easy. Now, I think that this question comes from one of two different places. Number one, there's a really big bias in our world that says a person with a disability is less capable than a person without a disability or less likely to succeed in their job or profession. And then two, the fact that we are a restaurant, I think pushes against a lot of people's ideas about the kind of work or kind of environment that a person with a disability would thrive in. All that to say, people are people are people. The hardest part of being an employer is that we employ people, not people with disabilities. So today we are going to break down 5 myths that I have heard, experienced, walked through over the past 7 years of owning a restaurant that has an integrated hiring model, meaning 50% of my team is disabled and 50% of my team is non-disabled, and we are here to debunk all of them today. The reason that this matters and is important is because there's still a really big unemployment gap for people with disabilities. And in order to close that gap, people with disabilities need to be accepted and welcomed in all work environments and industries. The restaurant industry is a really big freaking industry, not just in this country, but worldwide. And so opening that space up would be a really big part of tackling that unemployment gap. So let's go. All right. Myth number 1, people with disabilities can't work in a restaurant because people with disabilities can't function well in a high stress environment. Yes, the restaurant industry is not for every disabled person, but honestly, the restaurant industry is not for every non-disabled person either. There are people both with and without disabilities that function really well in a high stress, high pace, fast paced environment. It doesn't mean that it's for everybody, and it doesn't have to be. There are still a lot of people who function really well in this industry and in this kind of environment. And because our world is built for non-disabled humans, disabled humans oftentimes already have a set of coping strategies, mechanisms, stress management skills that they enter the world with because the world hasn't been created with them in mind. And those skills and those coping mechanisms translate really well into an environment where you're already dealing with some of that built-in stress or speed. And I've found that I actually have really learned a lot over the years from my disabled teammates about what it looks like to give yourself what you need, to advocate for yourself, and to do that without care or concern about how it may present to someone else or whether or not they're going to understand me in the process. Myth number 2, that people with disabilities can't work in a kitchen because there's hot stuff and sharp stuff. This one actually blows my mind a little bit, the number of times that I get asked, well, you don't let people with disabilities work in your kitchen, right? Yes, I do. In fact, let people with disabilities work in my kitchen. I think that this points to a larger cultural bias that people with disabilities just aren't safe. They don't know how to keep themselves safe. They're maybe even not safe to be around, which is a really deep and outdated bias and idea, but it's one that's not true. Safety in an environment really comes down to management. Are we training our staff well? Are we teaching our staff well? Do we have good safety precautions and structures implemented within our business? And are we adamant about protecting our staff and taking care of them? Those are the bigger issues. And those are issues that are not always handled seriously in all restaurants. So when there's a concern about safety for disabled humans working in a restaurant, that really points back more to the restaurant than it does to the person with a disability. Yes, sometimes fine motor skills can be a factor with someone with a disability, but again, that's a specific person or a specific subcategory of disability and does not apply to every person. Myth number 3, people with disabilities offer an inferior product or quality of service. This one really gets me on my soapbox. We regularly get comments here that are phrased or poised in the form of a compliment, but that point to this bias or idea that a person with a disability is just not very good at their job. And those kind of comments are like, we really love what you stand for, we like what your business is about, and the food is actually really good. There's this element of surprise, like, wow, we weren't expecting the food that you offered or the service that you provide to be as good as it is. This is something that's been important to me from day one, that we have an excellent restaurant, that the quality of our food, service, atmosphere, everything is top notch, and a place where my staff can be really proud that they work. And part of that is because I'm wanting to push against that idea and the expectation that someone with a disability offers an inferior product to someone without a disability. It's not true, and this is where my soapbox really comes into play, so bear with me for just a second. I think that the biggest reason that this bias is perpetuated is because when non-disabled people are looking to hire disabled people, they think the question, what business can I start that a person with a disability could work in? Instead of asking the question, how can I create inclusion and adaptations in the business that I already have so that people with disabilities are welcomed here. There's a really big difference. What we end up having in our culture is a lot of non-disabled people creating businesses that they have no knowledge or experience of in an attempt to give a person with a disability a job, but then that product or that service or that quality isn't that good. But that's because the person in leadership doesn't know what they're doing, not because a person with a disability is not capable of doing good work. So the way to switch that culturally is by people who are already the experts in their field becoming more inclusive and welcoming to people with disabilities in the field that they're already in, which is why I'm a restaurant, because that is what I am trained to do. I have been working in the restaurant industry since I was 18 years old, and I'm about to be 37. So for almost 20 years, this is my life, this is my experience, this is what I'm trained in, this is what I'm good at, and I want to change the way that the hiring model works in the industry that I'm already in. Myth number 4, adults with disabilities have meltdowns in public. Y'all, this one is so outdated and highly specific, and we need to just put it out of our brains, okay? Like, take that and just get rid of it. It is there for a reason. A lot of it has to do with media representation of people with disabilities and a very specific type of disability or type of disability expression that gets portrayed oftentimes in TV or movies, which is a lack of understanding around disability and what it actually looks like for a lot of people. So if this is a thought that you've had, you don't need to feel ashamed of it. It is there for a reason, but you can also let that one go. This is not the norm. Just like it's not the norm to see a non-disabled person have a meltdown in public, it's not the norm to see a disabled person have a meltdown in public either. Yeah, it could happen, but it's not the norm. It's definitely the exception and not the rule, and you're gonna be fine. You're gonna be fine. Everybody's going to be fine. If you work in a restaurant, the people that you will most likely see throwing tantrums are entitled guests. And lastly, number 5, that hiring people with disabilities costs too much money. The majority of accommodations or adaptations that need to be made can be made with very little to no expense. The biggest element is just being willing to think outside of the box and to do something in a way that may be different than what we've done before. For example, one of my employees has a traumatic brain injury, and so we have menu formats that we created that he can use as a visual prompt so that he doesn't have to rely solely on his memory when taking orders at a table. I spent money on the labor that it took for someone to develop the form and then the printing costs that it takes to print these forms out. It's very small. It makes his quality of life at work so much higher, and it improves accuracy, which overall is a cost add to the business. There's a lot of different examples and ways that we use this style of thinking or accommodations within our business and in our space. And we also prioritize independence and autonomy among our team. So if you're gonna have a job with us, you need to be able to fulfill that job and the roles and the responsibility that come with that role. Yes, there's a time and space for training and bringing someone up to speed, especially if they haven't worked in that job or in this industry before, but there is a point where that support shifts, changes, ends, etc., and that person is expected to fulfill their role the way that that role is set up to be. So again, that means that we're not a fit for everyone, but we don't need to be. We're a fit for a lot of people, and no business is or needs to be a fit for everyone. That's not the point. Lastly, on that point, the turnover rate for my team members with disabilities is actually quite a bit lower than my teammates without disabilities. So for businesses that are hesitant or cautious about bringing disabled humans onto your team because you think it's an added expense, there may be a small added expense in terms of what it looks like to create some systems or supports or structures in place for someone to be fully independent in their role, but the payout from that is usually much more than what you put in on the front end. So you do the math. All right, that's gonna do it for today. If this video was helpful for you, if you learned something, please like, comment, and subscribe. That would help me and my business out a lot. If you'd like to get connected with me, there are ways in my profile that you can do that. Or if you'd like to learn more about my business, which is Chez Jeunesse, then you can check out the Chez Jeunesse website here. Thanks for being along for the ride, and we will see you next time.